everybody. Welcome to sexual harassment training. My name is Laura Henderson, as Lauren mentioned, and I've been in human resources for over 20 years. And my first position in human resources, spent a lot of time doing sexual harassment investigations. And that was when I worked for Vaughn's Grocery, like Lauren mentioned. So I had a lot of experience doing that. And then also over the years, I've been responsible for doing quite a bit of sexual harassment training. So today we're gonna spend an hour on sexual harassment, and cover a couple things that are really important. Starting in 2019, it's required that every employer in California train their employees for 1 hour on sexual harassment training if they have 5 or more employees. So you can imagine this is a big shift from what has happened in the past. And you probably have seen in the news, at social media, there's definitely a need for this really important training. I know that it's not the most exciting training. A lot of times people are like, sexual harassment training, this is going to be so boring. So I hope it won't be boring. We'll cover all the things that we're required to from a compliance standpoint, but we'll also go through some examples. And I think, some of the examples, we'll see kind of on a spectrum. Some examples we'll talk about and you'll say, yeah, that's totally sexual harassment, inappropriate, unprofessional, maybe severe enough that somebody should lose their job for doing that even one time. And then some stuff will be on the other end of the spectrum where you'll say, no, that's fine for, people to, joke around about things that are professional in the workplace. So we'll talk about those items, and then some of the stuff in the middle, in between, where you might go, how does that work? Is that okay? Is that okay or not? One of the things I'll mention is that during the course of the training, I will use the terms sexual harassment and professionalism interchangeably, because I think sexual harassment sort of implies like the legal definition of sexual harassment, and I think you'll always do better if you think to yourself, if I make this comment, tell this story, tell this joke, is it professional at work or not, instead of is it sexual harassment? Because if the answer to you is no, or I'm not sure, then the best course of action would be for you to not say it or not do it, right? So I think that is much more clear. So if you hear that term professionalism, I actually prefer that over sexual harassment, but they're kind of interchangeable. So, open. So if you have a question, please, or a comment, please feel free to raise your hands at any time. So we already talked a little bit about this, but basically it's employers with 5 or more employees need to do training every 2 years for 1 hour. So today you're going to satisfy that requirement. But, obviously that's important from a compliance standpoint, but really the most important reason is that we want people to feel comfortable at work, right? We want you to say, I have a great workplace where I feel respected and valued, and I'm not, afraid to go to work because somebody is making me feel really uncomfortable. And that is truly the most important reason, is to have a respectful workplace where you know that you're treated, with respect and care. And I think that is also important. It's important for you guys because we want to, retain great employees and have you stay here for long periods of time. And it's also important when your company's trying to recruit new people, right? Because, with new people now, it's very easy, if you're considering employment with a company, it's very easy to get quite a bit of information, between like Glassdoor and Indeed and LinkedIn, and looking to see, I know somebody who used to work here or who does work here. So the company reputation can pretty easily be spread. So it's extremely important to have a workplace where people are going to say, yeah, you'll be treated with respect and care there. And also, What I've seen in my experience, like doing investigations for sexual harassment, is a lot of times when people do have a problem in the workplace and somebody's making them feel uncomfortable, they don't report it. Why do you think that is? Why do you think people would go on like that when they feel uncomfortable?
They're afraid to lose their job.
They're afraid to lose their job. That's right. That's one of the reasons. Any others?
I think maybe they had some part of it that they're just doubting about the veracity of it and like, is this really? And
Okay. Yeah, they question, does it truly meet the level of unprofessional behavior or sexual harassment? And then they wonder like, well, what was my part in that? Did I say something or do something? Okay. Yep. Any others?
Ostracization.
Okay, that's the one I was just gonna say. Yeah, sometimes they feel like if I make a complaint that I'm gonna be ostracized at work. You know, people are they're gonna start talking about me. They're gonna say, why is this person a troublemaker? That kind of thing. So what do they do instead? They get fired?
They just keep quiet.
They keep quiet, right? And, you know, some of the behaviors that we see sometimes when these don't get reported is they call in sick because maybe they work with somebody who makes them feel really uncomfortable and they know they're going to have a meeting with that person that day, or they avoid people. So if you have a colleague who makes you feel uncomfortable and you are supposed to work together as part of your job, but you don't like working with them, then you find ways to avoid them, right? You find ways not to talk with them in person. And that's not productive, right? Because it makes it harder for you to get your job done. So there's all these unproductive experiences that come when somebody doesn't feel they have the ability to report it or to say something or to make it stop. So we'll talk about today, how to handle that if you ever have a situation that makes you feel uncomfortable, what you should do. Okay? It's a competitive advantage if we have a workplace that is, respectful all the time and we don't have to worry about unprofessional behavior, sexual harassment, or discrimination. We're going to talk about discrimination today too. So, and sometimes, ultimately what people do when they can't get that issue resolved or they feel so uncomfortable at work is they quit. And sometimes they quit and they never even tell us that's why they left. And that's really unfortunate. And sometimes they'll tell a coworker, like 2 months later, you'll find out, oh, they quit because so-and-so made them feel uncomfortable. And that's a terrible outcome. So we're going to kind of define sexual harassment and what it is. I'm just going to read this part and then we'll stop and talk about it. So harassment is unwelcome sexual advances, requests for sexual favors, and other verbal or physical conduct of a sexual nature when submission to such conduct is made either explicitly or implicitly a term or condition of employment. Submission to or rejection of such conduct by an individual is used as the basis for employment decisions affecting an individual, or such conduct has the purpose or effect of unreasonably interfering with the individual's work performance or creating an intimidating, hostile, or offensive work environment. I think a lot of times, in the news or what the traditional expectation is, people think that it's, male boss, female employee, but it does not have to be that situation. It could be the opposite. It could be female boss and male employee. It can be female to another female or male to another male. And it can also be it could be coworkers, not a boss involved, but two coworkers, or it could even be like a vendor or a client. In your situation, you might have some times where you may need to reach out to Lauren and say, I have an uncomfortable situation. I need someone to help me work through it. And I know what Lauren has shared, and that's a challenge in your industry. Sometimes if you're dealing with somebody who has dementia or, it doesn't have to be just coworkers, okay? There's basically two types of sexual harassment, and we're going to talk about each of those. So quid pro quo is the most severe type of harassment, and quid pro quo means something in exchange for something else. So it is when submission to sexually harassing conduct is a term or condition of employment. So what this could mean is like, either you're going to see me romantically outside of work, or I am going to, fire you, or, otherwise make your life miserable. And that's the second part is submission to or rejection of such conduct as used as the basis for employment decisions. So that could be, controlling someone's rate of pay, their schedule, their general work environment. So this is a very, very serious. Later we'll look at kind of the spectrum of, yeah, that's totally sexual harassment, or no, that's fine. This is on the far end of the spectrum. And a lot of times these are the types of cases that you see like in the news, right? Severe. And so the next one is hostile work environment. This is, I would say, more commonly seen. And the definition is other conduct of a sexual nature that affects an individual's employment, unreasonably interferes with his or her work performance, or creates an intimidating, hostile, or offensive work environment. So this is, creating general discomfort for somebody due to inappropriate actions at work. Okay. So can anyone think of an example of something that could be hostile work, more of a hostile work environment situation?
Dirty jokes.
Yeah.
Not appropriate.
Dirty jokes, somebody talking about their sex life, from the past weekend, maybe sexual innuendo, that kind of thing, right? Okay. Okay, so now to keep in mind is that the conduct doesn't necessarily have to be sexual in nature or motivated by a sexual desire. So it doesn't have to be someone who has a sexual interest in you in order for you to feel that it's made you feel uncomfortable and unprofessional. And a couple examples of that are shouting, foul language, invading someone's personal space, making threatening gestures, or comments or actions that are directed at a specific group of individuals or group of people. Okay, so now I'm going to hand out yeah, that would be awesome. So this is just a handout. It's actually two-sided. So I'm going to have you guys help me read a couple of these, so I don't have to do them all. Okay. I wonder if that's going to work with our microphone. Maybe I will just do it because I want to make sure it gets recorded here. Okay, so we're going to talk about what types of conduct actually constitute sexual harassment, and we'll talk about a couple examples. So sexual harassment can come in many forms and can include verbal, visual, physical, and other types of conduct. As we go through these, you'll see, again, we have this kind of spectrum of things that are way on one side, unprofessional, sexual harassment, not appropriate at work, and so we'll stop and maybe talk about those briefly. So under the verbal section is suggestive or obscene comments, sexual innuendos, comments or questions about a person's sexual activities, jokes of a sexual nature, sexual propositions, threats, or demands for sexual activities, suggestive or sexist remarks about a person's body or clothing, offensive or intimidating comments about a person's gender, identity, gender expression, or sexual orientation. So what are sexual innuendos? Can anyone sort of give a definition of a sexual innuendo? So a sexual innuendo is when maybe something that doesn't specifically have a direct sexual meaning has sort of an implied sexual meaning. I mentioned to you that one of my first human resources jobs was doing investigations in the grocery store, and so I would have to do investigations like in the bakery or the service deli, and like a sexual innuendo could be somebody in the service deli, holding up a sausage and making jokes that had a sexual connotation. So those are the types of things that we're talking about with sexual innuendos. And then, in this little list, you can see sexual propositions, threats, or demands for sexual activities. That's on the extreme side of being totally inappropriate. And then moving on to visual, sexually suggestive objects, sexually suggestive entertainment, such as strippers, sexually oriented materials, suggestive looks or stares, exposure of breasts, genitals, or other private body parts. That last one, yes, that will definitely be inappropriate at work, exposing your body parts. And how about, I don't know if it's on here, how about leering? Does anybody know what that term, what do you think of when I say that term, leering?
I kind of think it's almost like cartoonish, like how obscene it is, but I don't think it has to be that overt if it makes you feel uncomfortable. So
Okay.
It would be like with the suggestive looks.
Uh-huh.
Somebody maybe looking at you that you don't feel is very professional.
Right.
If you wear especially, of course we're dressing professional, but if somebody is I always think if someone's unusually complimenting or very complimentary, but it makes you feel uncomfortable.
Okay. Yeah, this could be somebody who is, when you make eye contact with them, instead of looking at your face, they're looking you up and down slowly.
And then there's a smirk.
Right.
They always have a smirk.
Right. Okay. Yeah, that's what leering is, right? Some of these behaviors are, they're not as easy to identify, right? I guess when you feel it, right? Because you feel, wow, that just made me feel uncomfortable, right? Okay. And then moving on to physical. So physical is unwanted physical contact, including touching, pinching, or brushing the body, blocking or impeding a person's movement, coerced sexual act or intercourse, and assault or rape. So blocking or impeding the person's movement, if you went into the supply cabinet and somebody came up behind you and put both their arms on the outside of the door, that's what we're talking about, right? And I'm sure that would make you feel uncomfortable. And then other is preferential treatment of employees who do grant sexual favors to managers, requests for sexual favors accompanied by implied or overt promises or threats as a condition of employment promotion, increased hours, special days off, etc. And then it says this list is not all inclusive. Please remember that what constitutes sexual harassment is determined by the victim. That is, what is interpreted as harassment by one person may not seem like harassment to another. The validity of a charge of sexual harassment will be determined on a case-by-case basis. I think what's important about that is this is why I always talk about professionalism instead of sexual harassment, because that definition is a moving target, right? If we like to come in and tell sexual jokes and you hear the joke and you're fine with it and you don't think it's sexual harassment, but you hear the joke and you think it is, that is a moving target, right? So what I would ask you to think about is it professional at work? Is it something, that if it was overheard by one of our conservative clients, how would that feel? So I think that's much easier guideline. Any questions on that? So moving on, so we're going to talk about retaliation and the definition of retaliation. So retaliation is an adverse action taken against an employee because he or she complained of harassment or discrimination. So this would be like a demotion, change of decrease in pay, our negative review or something like that. So retaliation is illegal. That's really all you need to know about that. So it's illegal. Retaliation is included in the sexual harassment policy in the handbook. So if you have an issue and you bring it to Lauren's attention, you won't be retaliated against. Okay. And so now, again, talking about our company policy. So our policy mirrors federal and state law. It's in the handbook, so everyone should have gotten the handbook, I guess, upon hire, and probably you probably get annually every year. So if you ever have an issue of sexual harassment or discrimination, you can report it to Lauren or to anybody in management or human resources. Any idea why are there multiple reporting options?
That's harassing that person.
Right,
Yeah.
that's right. What if your manager is the one who is harassing you, right? You need to be able to have more than one option. So, so you can report it to anyone in management. And, you know, we would strongly encourage you to, if you do have an issue, we'd strongly encourage you to put it in writing. So it helps us, you know, to further investigate it. If you ever do have an issue, if the first line of defense, if you're comfortable with it, is yourself. Meaning, if somebody makes you feel uncomfortable, it's okay to say to that person, I really don't like your jokes, or your comments make me feel uncomfortable, or the way you look me up and down just doesn't make me feel comfortable. Please stop doing that. Okay? I know this is hard to do. I've seen many times where people cannot do it. So, but a lot of the time, if you do that, the person will stop. Sometimes they either don't know, or, you know, it just never was made clear to them that their behavior is inappropriate. So start there if you can, and if you can't, then, you know, you can bring it to Lauren's attention, and she can help you either by speaking with that person, or, you know, call me if you need additional help. Okay? So if you ever report something, you know, the company will do an investigation, and thoroughly, you know, look into each claim and complaint, and it'll be conducted in a discreet manner as much as possible. Sometimes you have to talk to other people who might have been witnesses or things like that. We're going to just check the time. Okay, I think we're okay. So now I'm going to talk about discrimination. So discrimination means to treat people differently. And from a legal perspective, it means people that are part of a protected status, okay? So there are, we're going to talk a little bit about what those protected classes are. I imagine that you guys know a couple of them right off the top of your head. So if you guys can throw out a couple specifics that you know are going to be on this list.
There's ageism,
Age, for sure. Yep. Okay. What else?
religion,
Religion, gender,
sexual orientation,
disability.
disability.
Okay. Any others? Okay. You did pretty good. Okay, so on this list we have age, mental or physical disability, pregnancy or perceived pregnancy, a medical condition, national origin and ancestry, race and color, marital status, gender identity, gender expression, and transgender status, religion, military and veteran status, sexual orientation or stereotypes, and sex, including pregnancy and childbirth and breastfeeding. So, what I always think about is interesting about this slide is, you know, when you look at all the protected classes, almost everybody falls into one or more protected classes, right? So, you know, that's again why I think it's important to focus on professionalism and being professional in the workplace, and not worry as much about the legal definitions, but worry more about how you treat people, and always treat people with respect in the workplace. So a couple definitions. So these topics were added in 2018. It was before sexual harassment training was required for any company that had 50 or more employees. They had to train supervisors every 2 years, and there's very specific requirements on what must be covered in the training. So these definitions were added to kind of keep up with the times. And like I said, that was 2018. So I'm going to read through them, and then we'll talk about some examples. So gender identity is one's internal personal sense of being a man or a woman or a boy or a girl. And for someone who's transgender, their birth assigned sex and their own internal sense of their gender do not match. Okay. And then you have gender expression. So this is an external manifestation of one's gender identity, which is usually expressed through masculine or feminine or gender variant behavior, clothing, haircut, voice, or body characteristics. Okay. And then sexual orientation is one's enduring sexual attraction to male partners, female partners, or both. So sexual orientation could be heterosexual, gay, or bisexual. Okay, so I'll give you an example. I have a niece, and her name is Ricky. She is a female, so her gender identity is female, and she has a male gender expression. And so what I mean by that is she keeps her haircut very short in a masculine style. And she wears masculine attire. Like, she does not wear dresses. She wears like combat boots and army pants. So that is her gender expression. And she's a lesbian. So that is her sexual orientation. So you can see for Ricky, we kind of went through each one of those three items. Okay. So, and we talked in the gender identity, we talked about transgender. And that's a person whose identity and or expression is different from the cultural expectations of the sex that they were born to. Okay, and somebody who's transgender could identify as straight, gay, or bisexual. So there's kind of a lot of different pieces here on this slide. Any questions? Okay. So now we're going to talk about abusive conduct and bullying. So this topic was also a required addition a couple years ago. And I think that this is actually way more common than some of the sexual harassment topics, especially in workplaces that already have a respectful environment. Because I think if you have a medium or large size workforce, there's almost always one or more people in the workplace who sort of display the tendencies of a bully. Okay, so let's kind of define what abusive conduct or bullying is. So this is conduct with malice that a reasonable person would find hostile, offensive, and it's unrelated to the employer's legitimate business interests. So this is behavior that causes a negative environment, and it reduces productivity. It could be yelling or swearing, repeated infliction of verbal abuse such as derogatory remarks and insults. It could be verbal or physical conduct that a person would find threatening or intimidating or humiliating. And it could be somebody who sabotages or undermines a person's work performance. Who has worked with someone who's a bully? I'm not going to ask you who it is.
Not here.
Yeah, okay.
Yeah, back when I was younger.
Okay.
Quite a few different jobs.
Okay, I was going to say
better, multiple jobs.
Almost everyone, if you have been in the workforce for, probably more than 5 years, I'll say, almost everybody, you might not have been personally affected by somebody who was a bully, but most people are able to say, oh yeah, when I worked at XYZ, that one person was a bully, right? So, I think this potentially is a big problem. So it's back to respect in the workplace, and always, trying to get the best out of people. And, the biggest impact when you work with somebody who's a bully is it talks about, in the definition here, how basically it's interfering with that person's ability to do a professional job, right? So that's where it really impacts employers, when they have somebody in the workplace that's a bully. I had a situation where a manager managed a production department and got so angry with the employees in the department that they took a box and threw the box at one of the people in the department. that's just not appropriate behavior in the workplace, you know. So, anyway, any questions or comments? Nope. Okay. Are going to now we're kind of moving on to how to prevent harassment and discrimination. So, I think the first thing is providing a professional environment, and a lot of the responsibility of that is on Lauren and the managers. So, they set a culture that has basically a professional workplace where you treat people with respect and courtesy. I've been working with Lauren for about a year and a half, so I've seen that that environment does exist here. So, and then when there are situations that come up, making sure those situations do get addressed in a timely manner. And then, of course, having a written policy in place, which you guys already do have, and then training. So, this will satisfy your training for the next 2 years, and hopefully you'll learn a couple things and be able to apply some of these things at work. I've already referred to the term professionalism several times in the presentation, but I really think this is kind of the core of the sexual harassment training. I think that what I always ask is if you view something through the lenses that we're going to talk about, it makes it way easier to see if something's okay at work or not. So if you're questioning, should I tell that story about my weekend? Should I tell that joke? I think another common one that happens is, like in the news, there's a lot of topics that can get pretty close to the fringe, so there's some topics that you might even think, I don't know if I should really even be discussing that at work, because if a client that was conservative overheard me discussing it, would they be offended? And if the answer to that is yes, then don't bring it into the workplace. So here's a couple guidelines. So what if that conservative client heard you is the first one. What if your son or daughter, was exposed to that comment or behavior in the workplace? Would you feel comfortable with that? Or your spouse? What if your comment, was videoed? Which can actually happen now, right? Like someone's videoing you and you didn't even know it because everybody has the phone in their pocket. So what if your comment was videoed and shown on the nightly news? How would you feel? Would you be embarrassed by that? If the answer is yes, then keep that comment to yourself. What if your grandma or your grandpa had overheard that comment? I know my grandma was she was pretty conservative, so if your grandma wasn't, you could use mine. Or what if your comment was overheard by Mother Teresa? Would you be embarrassed? And so, I think if you're questioning if something is appropriate, then don't say it, because that's a red flag, right? So if you're even questioning, like, oh, should I say that? Then just don't even bother. This part's really important. So let's talk about non-professional behavior at work when it does happen, okay? Because we know we spend a lot of time at work, and there's a lot of you make work friends, right? Hopefully you get some people that you work with that you really like, and you kind of become friends with them at work. So that is completely normal. But in the course of that, there's times where somebody's going to make a comment that probably was, in retrospect, inappropriate. So how can you handle it if somebody else makes a comment or an action that's inappropriate at work? What can you do about that?
Like you said before, it's hard, but tell them that it made you uncomfortable.
Right.
Yeah. Like
Yes.
right when it happens.
Say something, right? Right? You could just straight out say that joke made me feel uncomfortable, or you could maybe say, I don't think we should be talking about this at work. For those of you, everyone, I think Lauren's plan is that everyone goes through this training. I'm not sure what the time frame is, but so if everyone's gone through the training, you could even, kind of refer back to the training and say, ooh, I don't think Mother Teresa would have liked that comment, right? And then everybody kind of knows, right? Because they went through the training. They go, oh yeah, that was one of the questions.
I have a quick question though, that's bringing other people's religion into it. But I guess the Mother Teresa comment is what I'm saying.
okay.
Because, you know, I'm Catholic, so I wouldn't have a problem saying that, but somebody who's not Catholic may not appreciate it. That, I'm just wondering if
I
that
mean,
would be over the line
I
with
don't.
religion.
I mean, I think so. The question is, well, what about Mother Teresa?
Yeah.
Is that religious? I mean,
Yeah,
You-
that's what I was just saying, is that opening the door to saying, are you preaching it to me about Mother Teresa? You know what
you
I
can.
mean?
I mean, you could use a different example. You could say, you know, I don't think that would be good if this was shown on the nightly
Right,
news.
that's a good one.
I mean, the application there is about somebody who is a religious person. Doesn't have to be Mother Teresa, but
Right.
Mother Teresa is a well-known
Right.
religious figure. So
I was wondering if it opened a door to something else.
I don't
just in
think so.
case.
Yeah,
Okay.
but that's a good point, right?
Right.
You don't want to open another inappropriate. Yeah. Yeah, but you could say, you know, any of the things that we talked about, you could kind of use that as an example, right? Yeah, so those are great responses. Another thing that you can do is you can walk away, right? You just turn around and walk away. If you're in a group of people and the conversation starts to go sideways, you know, you just turn around and walk away. Okay. But don't be afraid to tell someone if you feel comfortable. You know, hey, I don't think we should be talking about that at work. Okay. A career of a couple of years, there will be a time when you make a comment yourself and then you later go, oh my gosh, I shouldn't have said that, or I said it and maybe I didn't intend for it to have any sexual innuendo attached, but then after I said it, I realized that it did. How can you handle those situations? Because, I mean, is there anybody who has that happened? Raise your hand if that's happened to you. That, like, in your lifetime of career, maybe you said something that, yeah, okay, it happens, right? So how would you handle that? How can you handle that too?
Immediately address it and say, I realize now that was a mistake.
Yeah, you could say right off the bat, you can say, I'm sorry, that did not come out the way I intended it to, right? Okay. Or, you know, if it's something you reflect on, you know, the next day, you could, when you see that person, you could say, hey, I thought about our conversation yesterday, and I think I might have said something that I shouldn't have said, and I didn't mean to offend you. I didn't mean to, you know, I didn't mean to make that comment or imply that, you know, in a sexual way. Okay, so don't be afraid to do that if you make a misstep, because, like I said, everyone in this room has had, you know, a career of a couple years, and there will be a time where you say something. It might not be sexual in nature. It might be a comment that is more in the, you know, unprofessional, or something that's maybe like bullying, or it came out as, you know, a little hurtful, you know. So it may not have been discriminatory or sexual harassment, but it's just something that, you know, it was unprofessional at work. Okay. Okay, how are we on time? Okay. Okay, so just briefly, I'm going to talk about handling complaints. So, you know, if there ever is a complaint, your complaint will be investigated. If you know of an issue with one of your coworkers and that coworker needs some help, please encourage them to go and talk to Lauren instead of smoldering inside or calling in sick or deciding to quit. Okay, because we truly do want you to have, you know, a happy, professional, productive work environment. So, you know, I've done many investigations, so there's a process for that. It's confidential as much as possible. Sometimes other people need to be interviewed, so that's taken into account. And then, you know, there's a documentation process, and then depending on the severity of the claim, you know, appropriate action could be taken up to including termination, depending on the behavior of the person. You know, if it's something severe, then, you know, they will be terminated. And there's also, you know, we make sure, like, if somebody files a false claim, there's also disciplinary action for that. Sometimes. So your personal responsibilities are to make sure that you're meeting the appropriate professional expectations and to know and comply with our policy. Just quickly, I'm going to talk about these special situations. So we talked earlier about, you think sexual harassment, you always think of like the traditional examples where male boss, female employee, but that's definitely not the case in all situations. So harassment can occur between two people that are peers, coworkers. Also, sexual harassment can occur outside of the workplace or during non-work hours. So this could be like, for example, during a lunch break or before or after work, immediately after work. And, employer is ultimately responsible for providing you a professional work environment. So even if something is happening outside of work, it's impacting you inside of work, okay? And then the last one is harassment by non-employees. We talked a little bit about this, but this could be, somebody who's a vendor or a client. And I think that particular example is really important for you guys because there may be times where you need to reach out to Lauren or your supervisor and say, I need a little help with this client because I feel uncomfortable at work. Okay. I think I'm going to skip those two. So, okay. So, on the back of the handout that I gave you, we're just going to go through a couple samples, and we'll just read through those and discuss them as a group. So this is is it or isn't it scenarios. So we talked about this kind of spectrum, right? Of certain things that we're going to talk about and look at. You're going to say that's totally sexual harassment, illegal. That person should be fired. And then there's some other things that you might say, that's totally fine. That's totally acceptable behavior in the workplace. And then there are maybe a couple in the middle that we'll discuss. So we'll just spend maybe a minute or so on each one of these. So 2 employees are in the break room on lunch. One employee is telling the other employee a dirty joke and the other employee is laughing. Is that appropriate? Professional? No. Okay. Yeah, so it's a dirty joke. We just talked about how even though it's at lunch, it doesn't matter. It's still impacting the workplace. So you can't just turn off and on that switch of professional behavior at lunch, okay? Okay, so one employee says to another employee, that's a really cute haircut. Is that okay? Yeah, that's okay if it's not leering, right? So if it's just a casual conversation and there's been, no other uncomfortable comments, if somebody says that's a really cute haircut, that's fine. What if it does make you feel uncomfortable? What if there have been, or what if there's a look with it? Then what? Yeah, then you might have to say something, right? But in this example, it doesn't tell us that. It doesn't imply that. So we will assume this is just, a comment. So, okay, Sam, the custodian, is a hugger. He's an older guy and is harmless, but he frequently hugs the ladies he hasn't seen for a while. You're not a fan of his hugs, but no one else seems to mind. What do you think? This is more gray area.
You don't have to, it depends.
Okay.
You could tell him I don't like hugging.
Yeah, I would say.
Yeah.
But not if the other girls are,
Yeah.
that guy.
Yeah, so this kind of comes back to, how do you handle a situation in the workplace that makes you feel uncomfortable? You can say, I'm not a hugger, right? I'm not a hugger, right? Or, you can also talk to Lauren and say, you might say, I don't feel it's sexual harassment, but I just don't like it, right? I just don't feel it's professional. It makes me feel uncomfortable. Yeah, so, kind of in the gray area, but depending on how it impacts you, you have options. Janice, the file clerk, is putting files in the bottom drawer. Kevin, the office manager, is standing next to her and says, while you're down there, do a guy a favor. Totally unacceptable. This is sexual innuendo, right? This is a perfect example of sexual innuendo. He never said, penis or, a word that was overt, but it was implied. So, clowning around, one staff member moons the other employees in the department. Right, okay, this is a perfect example where this is probably not a sexual act, right? But it's totally unprofessional to show any of your genitalia or your bottom to your coworkers, right? Okay, yeah. A clerk in the marketing department asks an employee in accounting out on a date. Is that acceptable or unacceptable, or what do you think?
Depends on the work policy.
Yeah.
Okay,
If you're allowed
yeah.
to do
Yeah.
that.
Depends on the
They're
policy.
equals on the equal level.
Yeah,
It's
they're
just a
they're
date.
colleagues. I mean, what's interesting about this is I think a lot of people meet their spouses at work, right? And
Yeah.
that's relatively common. So typically, one request for a date is not sexual harassment. If the person says, "Thank you, but I'm not interested," and the colleague continues to repeatedly ask, for a date, then it could become unprofessional and, potentially sexual harassment. So, and again, this is where sometimes it's challenging to straight out say, "Thank you, but I'm not interested, and I would appreciate it if you don't ask me out again." Sometimes that's a little hard to say. So if you need help with that, you can always reach out to Lauren. But that's kind of the way to get that to stop. While passing in the hall, a male employee slowly looks a female employee up and down, focusing on her private parts. We've kind of talked about this example a little bit already. So that's leering, and that's not appropriate. And, we talked about how you could address that if that were something that were happening. An employee mentions that one UPS driver makes her feel very uncomfortable with the way he looks at her and the comments he makes. She asks you to keep the information to yourself.
If you're her supervisor, it's one thing, but you should just encourage her to go to management.
Right.
You can't make a complaint for her, but you can encourage her to do it. Because she's probably doing it to other people too.
Right. Could be. Yeah. And, again, this is where it would be great if the person feels, strong enough to say something to that UPS driver, but a lot of times that's not the case. So sometimes they need someone to help them do that, especially when it's, an outside party. Sometimes it's a little, coworker, you might feel like, hey, I know this person, I just need to tell them. So sometimes, you might need assistance actually taking that step. But, this is just an example where it is an outside party, so it could be a vendor or a client, but it's still okay to ask for help if you need help addressing that issue. Okay, so you run into Isabel, a new employee, and she's been crying. When you ask her why, she says that her coworkers are making fun of her because she still lives with her parents and her mom makes her lunch every day. The bullying, yeah, this is bullying behavior. It's not sexual harassment or discrimination. It's just not kind and respectful, right? So, and, again, whether it's sexual harassment or discrimination or bullying, these are the kinds of things where people, they end up leaving. They end up leaving a job that they might have otherwise loved because of situations like this, right, that don't get resolved. So, it's okay if you need some help with dealing with a coworker on how to handle that. You hear through the grapevine that Jack in finance keeps asking Jill to post more swimsuit photos on Instagram. Jill said it's kind of creepy. This is kind of a timely one, social media, right? So, but sort of taking place outside of the workplace. Right? So how would you handle a situation like this? What if your coworker told you that Jill's your coworker and she says, "Jack keeps asking me to post these photos. It's creepy."
I think I would encourage her to tell him.
Uh-huh.
It's making me feel uncomfortable. It's kind of creepy.
Right.
And
If
block
you don't
him on
stop, I'm
Instagram.
going to block you.
Right.
Yeah.
Block him, right?
Yeah.
What are you gonna do about it?
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. Okay, so you're considering Mitcha a caregiver with many years' experience to work with you. The other manager says she's too old.
Discrimination.
Yeah, that's discrimination, right? That's totally discrimination, not appropriate. So, one of your longtime employees lost her mom to cancer last week. Today is her first day back. A few of her coworkers have given her hugs today.
I don't see anything wrong
It's
with that.
okay.
That's fine, right? That's fine. I mean, we do, like we talked about, you have work friends. We want you to build relationships at work, and that is totally a normal response. So, yeah, that's totally fine. Your boss has suggested that if the two of you were to develop a relationship outside of work, promotion, bonuses, and other benefits would come your way. Totally unacceptable. Definitely on, sort of the far extreme. And this is what we talked about, quid pro quo sexual harassment, something in
That's the
exchange
word.
for something else. So that's definitely unprofessional.
And that's one of the ones that's punishable by law, right there, right?
It's illegal, yeah,
Right.
straight out illegal.
Mhm.
I mean, it's typically something like that is a termination offense. Sometimes the other ones someone might get a disciplinary action like a written warning, or sometimes it's if it's something like maybe you were asked out on a date and you felt uncomfortable and you asked Lauren to talk to one of the a coworker. That might just be a verbal conversation that's coaching. It's not disciplinary. It's just the employee didn't realize you've asked this person out twice and they didn't really feel comfortable telling you it's kind of bothering them. So can you please stop? That is a casual conversation, right? So you kind of have everything possible along that spectrum. So, any questions? Anything we didn't talk about that you guys have questions or comments on?
I've come across over the years, not just the client, not harassment from clients, but from family members and people in the household, because we run into so many different
Okay.
people. So that's definitely, and I've had to come to my employer a couple times and say,
Okay.
either I'm not gonna be part of, because there's not a lot you can do about that, but they just put you somewhere else. And so it's always, with Lauren, I've approached her over the last 5 years twice, and
Okay.
it gets nipped in the bud.
Okay,
So that's good, you don't feel afraid, because there's sons, you can get bullied around by the husband, you can
Right.
get, and it's not.
The daughters.
And the daughters,
Yeah.
The daughters.
or the friends,
Yeah.
or they're not your boss, and there's over the I've heard from not this company, a young girl had been the son was always there when she was there, and
uh-huh.
the layering, and it's just
Right,
and
creepy.
this is, I've been doing this 25 years, so it happens, but it's now the laws behind you where you
Right.
couldn't do it before.
Right.
And some companies just don't care. This
Right.
is a good. It's good they're putting this in policy.
Right. It's great. I mean, it's great to hear
Because you just don't want to go back.
Right. It's great to hear that specific example
And violence.
shared.
There you see violence.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. So if you do have a situation, bring it to Lauren's attention, because she can start with talking to the client. If it doesn't get resolved, then she'll pull you out of there, right? So, and I know that is really a special circumstance that's kind of unique to your work environment.
Right.
So
And
that's
we see
not something.
strangers and
Yeah. Yeah.
and they're not really under her auspice of being. She's not the boss of them.
Right.
So it's kind of I've seen it over the years many times. Not
Yeah.
just me, but.
Yeah. Okay, so I am going to give you guys two things. One, this is just a group sign off, so everyone can just sign on one line, and then one sign off for each person individually, and that'll just go in your personnel file. And you guys, so trying to move towards this hashtag not here, right?
In my
Instead
office.
of me too, right? So you guys just take one of those, and then I'll start this one here. Just sign that.
My mom used to say, if we said something inappropriate, would you kiss your grandma with that mouth? Oh,
Right.
And so we'd be like, whoop, whoop.
Yeah.